Alrighty. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I know that's it's a busy time of year, and you guys have a lot of things going on. But in this next 60 to 90 minutes, we're going to go over a lot of good information for you, for your businesses, but also things that you can be expecting from your customers to be asking you about. Let's see. Can we go to the next screen real quick? Alrighty. Just real quick, there's going to be a few of us on here presenting over to you. We each have our own little specialty and specialty topics. The three presenters, you guys have seen this on the registration webpage, on the emails that you've been getting, all that stuff. So there's going to be Don Gillis, Jeff Werther, and myself. We're all going to just quick say hi, stuff like that, but we all have a good chunk of material to go over with you today. Let's see. Sorry, throughout this whole thing, we're going to be getting alerts. There's a lot of folks writing in questions and stuff, so we may our attention may get distracted a little bit. We're trying to give you guys the best and give you guys the most response that we can as well. My name's Chris Piles. I am the one who did the first distributor webinar for y'all, and we were talking primarily about XL41. And this time we're moving over to a couple other products, but still keeping it with A2Ls because it's the big deal this year. 2024 is the big deal. I'll just let Don and Jeff say hi, and we'll carry on.
Hi, everyone. Looking forward to it, Chris. Thanks for the invite. I'm Don Gillis.
And I'm Jeff Werther. Appreciate your time, Chris, to invite us to talk about a little bit more into the commercial refrigeration world as well as the air conditioning. So look forward to the opportunity.
Awesome. Alrighty, guys. Well, thanks a lot. Some housekeeping stuff for all y'all out in the audience. Please feel free to text in any or to type in any questions. It's over in the chat box. If you go over to the side of your monitor, you're going to be able to see where all the chats are. You can enter stuff in there. We've got people who are going to monitor those. And while the whole audience may not see the questions come in, what is going to show up on our side is everything that comes in, right? So we're monitoring those, and we're going to get those questions fed over. We're going to have a Q&A period at the end of the presentation, after the end of all the slide decks. But we're going to have a track of all the questions that are coming in as well, right? So we'll be able to take care of those. We've left about 10 to 15 minutes in this 60-minute period to go over some of those questions and to answer them. But we've also extended out this time frame on our side for 90 minutes, so an additional 30 minutes. So if we do have questions and it is going longer than that 10 to 15 minutes, we can keep going. And if you guys want to also stay with us, right? But if your 60 minutes is up and you've got a customer meeting or something like that, feel free to jump off. Now, additionally, all of this is being recorded. So if you are in a situation where you need to bounce out, we're going to send out the recording to anybody who's registered. So attending or just registered but not able to attend, you're going to get a link to a recording of this whole thing. So there's going to be a lot of material. There's going to be a lot of ways to use it, and also a lot of ways for you to engage with us during this process. Alrighty, next slide, please. All right, our little agenda, the agenda looks simple, but there's a lot of beef behind it. We're going to go over some OEM announcements just real quick. We get a lot of questions about those. We also get a lot of questions about new product launch information, some stuff that's coming out from us on our side for commercial refrigeration. Also regulations and codes updates. Jeff's going to handle that, and there's actually a lot there, so a lot to dig in on. And then last part on there is going to be working with A2Ls, and that's going to be Don Gillis. And it's very interesting. Really, again, there's a lot of beefy information in there. Like I said, the last part on there, we've got some time allotted for Q&A. So feel free to hang tight with us, and let's get ready. Next slide, please. Oh, real quick. I'm not sure if everybody is on the same page as this and heard all the little updates, but there's been some personnel changes, right? So everybody knows Gary and Beth and Mark and John. I'm not sure if you've met Mitch. So Mitch is a new addition to the team. He came over from the business development side on our company, and he's new to the aftermarket sales team. So feel free to give him a call, send him an email, some kind of a virtual flower arrangement. I don't know what you want to send Mitch, but feel free to reach out to him. If you do hear from him, he is a new addition to the aftermarket sales team. And then also we all have Derek Ramsey, he's up in Canada. So feel free, this is our aftermarket sales team. Feel free to reach out to any of these guys that are assigned to you, right? And if none of these names look familiar and you're wondering who your guy is, then go up to the top one and reach out to Gary Davis, and he'll be able to help you connect with the right person for your group. And it's arranged out by regions, that kind of thing. So if you don't recognize any of these names, reach out to Gary at the top of the list. And let's see. All right, next one. Purpose of this information and this presentation. This is super important, and this is something that I've connected with a lot of folks this half of the year. It feels like a half a year already, right? I've connected with a lot of folks at these trade shows that we've been doing, and there's an important nugget to keep in mind with all of this. Ways to use this information. This webinar is made for you guys to make your business decisions, right? And it helps you kind of get orientated to what's happening out there beyond what your customers are hearing, what you're hearing, what you might be hearing from Hardy. There's a little bit more information to kind of round out the picture. Okay, so there's definitely information here for your business decisions, but additionally, a lot of this is going to be information that you're going to need in order to answer good questions from your customers. Your customers are starting to get introduced to this idea, and they're going to start coming to you with questions. So that's pretty much the main reason that we're recording this and sending it to you, is so that when you do get questions, you can either rewatch this, or you can pull this up on your laptop and you can go through it and you can have them listen to us answer that question, okay? Or give you more information about it, right? So this presentation part is all about making sure that you are empowered to move forward with your customers as much as it is for your business to make good decisions regarding how you're moving forward this year. Okay, now here's the nugget I was talking about, okay? Right down at the bottom, contractors who are not comfortable talking about working with A2Ls are gonna move towards repairing 410A systems instead of installing new 454B systems. And this is gonna hurt your business and it's gonna hurt theirs. And essentially, right, you're gonna talk about what you're comfortable about. If your contractor is gonna go sit down at the kitchen table with Mrs. Jones and he's not comfortable with talking about A2Ls, he's gonna talk about repairing that 410A system and giving it another 2 years. He's gonna go to where he's comfortable, where he's proficient, and where he can really shine. And if he can only shine with 410A, he's gonna be in the repair business, okay? So keep in mind that your customers are gonna be able to sell new systems, new A2L systems, if they're comfortable. So it's gonna be you working with them, you answering their questions, you giving them what they need in order to be able to move forward with A2Ls. Okay, if that makes sense, then you'll get the most out of all of this information the rest of 2024. Alrighty, that's the basic beginning. Can we move on to the next slide? Hey, that's me. We'll go over some OEM announcements and new product launches. Next slide, please. Okay, real quick on this list. This is a list of OEMs and brands that have publicly announced what direction they're going. They're going with 454B or they're going with R32. This is not a full and complete list of all OEMs, like you'll see. The OEMs that are missing from this list have still not publicly said if they're going with 454B or 32. But the ones on this list have, if you were to search, like for at the top line, right? If you were to search Aon and 454B, you would see that link. That link would pop up in your Google search, okay? So that's the way we went through all of these things. So there are internet articles or announcements for all of these OEMs saying which direction they're going. So if you have questions about it, or if your customers have questions about it, this is what's public information at this point. And this list used to be only 3 OEMs. So going up until I think January, even AHR, right? Even almost at AHR, there was only a handful of OEMs that were publicly saying which direction they're going. But now that it's 2024, everyone's kind of opening up, right? Everyone's underway. Now you might have noticed the 2 yellow stars over on the side. And those 2 OEMs, Train and Carrier, in the past 14 days, right, past 2 weeks, they announced that they are actively taking orders for 454B equipment. And maybe it's not their full lineup has been launched, but it's on, okay? The green flag has been waved, it's starting, okay? So you may start hearing more about it from your customers. You may be a Trane or a Carrier dealer, and you may be hearing from them. This may be something that you're actively working on, but the information is out there. Okay, these announcements are public that they are actively taking. They're actively taking orders. So just be aware of that. Okay. I have a handful of minutes left, and I've talked too much. So let's flip on through the next slide, please. Okay, product launches. You may have heard about 454A and 454C. We've done a lot of talking about ABC, the future as simple as ABC. That's that 454A, 454B, and 454C. Okay. Interestingly, the commercial refrigeration industry segment is going to be using 454A and 454C. You're not really going to see these for air conditioning. The reason that they haven't been officially launched yet is because everybody's waiting for SNAP Rule 26 to officially authorize OEMs to use these refrigerants in their products. And we'll talk about that in a sec, okay? But essentially, that's what they're held up for. They've been approved for air conditioning. They've been approved for a lot of applications that they're not going to normally be used in. So at this point, launching them is maybe a little, putting the cart before the horse a little bit, right? So we'll talk about, you know, SNAP Rule 26, what's been proposed, and when we're expecting the final ruling. But once the final ruling comes out, then we're good to go, right? We can start putting these out on the shelves and stuff. Okay, so let's move on to the next screen. These, you may have seen these before, right? There's just a little bit of information about XL40, 454A. It's for systems that are going to be less than 200 pounds, right? So you're going to talk about like your, well, Jeff can probably talk more about it, right? But it's the walk-in coolers, systems that have an external condensing unit, maybe something up on the roof, but it's a walk-in cooler type application, right? You're keeping the milk cold, you're keeping the beer cold, that kind of thing. So in those systems, your GWP has to be less than 300. This meets that goal. It's very efficient, has a lot of capacity. So this is a good match for that one. That's where you're going to see it. It is an A2L, similar designs to a 404A, which has a huge GWP, about 4,000. It uses POE oil, and oh, that's it for exterior condensing units for low temperature and medium temperature. Okay, so that's where you're going to see 454A. That's where it's going to fit. Next slide, please. So 454C. Okay, this is for those larger systems, right? You're talking about you know, something that uses over 200 pounds. I think of commercial refrigeration, like you go into the supermarket and it's got all those meat coolers and all that stuff. There's 1,000 pounds of refrigerant racing through there. So you're going to see XL20 going into systems like that, right? The ones that have to have a GWP lower than 150. Those are massive systems. And you know, Jeff can talk about all of that all day long. But I just wanted to hit on these products. Here's some of the highlights. But as I said, SNAP 26 is the big deal. I'm looking at the clock, guys. I'm looking at the clock. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this is proposed rule SNAP 26, and SNAP is a part of the EPA. So if you're wondering, the EPA has a program called SNAP, and SNAP is significant new alternative products. So what they need to do is SNAP goes in, basically the EPA goes in, reviews all the test data, and approves refrigerants for specific purposes. And if you look on this table, you're going to see the actual purpose, right? The application there. So commercialized machines, industrial process refrigeration, cold storage, ice skate rinks, right? That's the application, the end use. And then the middle column are the refrigerants that this rule approves for those applications. Okay. So what you're going to see is all throughout that center column, you're going to see 454A, B, and C, and some of them, and other ones, you're only going to see A and C, like cold storage warehouses, right? That's A and C. Ice skating rinks, you're just going to see C. And that's because it lines up with the technology transition rule, okay? Only refrigerants who meet that lower GWP criteria are going to be considered for applications, for these applications. Okay, so that's why you're not seeing all of the products there. You get down to that bottom one, it's kind of hidden amongst all the words. Supermarket systems for remote condensing units, that's where you're going to see that 454A and 454C. There's some other ones in there as well, but only when this rule is officially published can OEMs start using this, start producing it. They can test with it, they can do all their R&D on it, but they can't start producing units until this rule gets approved. Okay, that is a little on Snap 26. So I'm glad you're getting a recording of this. Feel free to take little screenshots as we go through. But let's see, next slide, please. That might be it for me. That is it for me. I'd like to reintroduce you to Mr. Jeff Warther, and he will go over some more wonderful regulations. If you like the Snap bit, you're going to love Jeff's bit.
Yeah, everybody loves Snap. So yeah, so thanks, Christian. So as he said, my portion of today's updates involve the latest information on the codes and regulations. I'll discuss how the AIM Act, the EPA's Technology Transition Program, as well as the proposed Refrigerant Management Program all work together to transition not only the air conditioning segment, but also the commercial refrigeration segment. And this is all designed to get the best refrigerant or the lowest GWP refrigerant into these different segments. So let's start with the AIM Act. So if you advance to the next slide. And so many people have seen a version of this HFC phase down slide, but what I wanted to do is to help everyone understand the phase down or the reductions are based on something called CO2 equivalents versus what some people think it might just be, this phase down might just be a phase down or reduction of pounds of refrigerant. So if you click the slide, I think it's a build slide here. And so what we can do is look at an example of the upcoming R410A to R454B transition that's going to occur January 1st, 2025 within the residential and light commercial air conditioning segment. As a refrigerant manufacturer, Chemours will move from utilizing over 2,000 of our GWP or CO2 equivalents per ton of R410A refrigerant. So we'll be able to go from 410A that's manufactured in current equipment now and use up currently 2,000 of our GWPs are in this big bucket versus January 1st, 2025, where we'll be able to use that same 2,000 GWPs and build nearly 4.5 times more R454B refrigerant that's going to be charged into the new equipment. So R410A is over 2,000 GWP, as you can see, and then R454B is under 500 GWP. If you click one more time on the build, I think it will show for folks that are dealing with commercial refrigeration, right? Chris mentioned 404A. Yeah, and it's close to 4,000 on its GWP. So if we take that same approach, we could build 1 ton of R404A and use close to 4,000 of our GWPs versus as we move to these lower GWP refrigerants like 454C, Chemours can build over 26 times more refrigerant and use the same amount of our GWP allocations. So click again and it'll advance to the next part in this slide. And so the EPA is actually taking a multi-pronged approach to this transition, right? First, they're telling refrigerant manufacturers like Chemours to use your allocations or quotas wisely and help the industry move to these lower GWP refrigerants as quickly as possible. Second, what you see there is something called sector controls. And what the EPA has done is they've established GWP limits on many of the sectors or segments of our industry that OEMs will have to comply with. Now, I'm going to talk more about the sector controls in a minute. Let me finish this phase down transition. So if you click one more time, this is where it's important for everyone in the industry, right? As we look towards the 2029 phase down, it's going to be extremely important to incorporate more reclaimed or recycled refrigerant into our industry to help lower the impact on these higher GWP refrigerants like 404A or even R410A. Now, the EPA is working on information on that refrigerant management program that I mentioned on the first slide, and that is scheduled, or this RMP is scheduled to be released later this year, and that's going to help guide the industry through this recovery and reclaim process. So for distribution, I think you're probably seeing it already. It's a really important piece moving forward, that there are some good R410A and R404A reclaim programs to help us move through the transition like 2029 and beyond. All right, go to the next slide. What we'll do now is shift our discussion to the sector controls that I talked about just a minute ago. And sector controls are part of this technology transition. And so this first slide is discussing the air conditioning segment. And like I say, most of you on this call know that there's been a 700 GWP limit that's been applied to residential and light commercial air conditioning equipment. And it starts January 1st, 2025. Now, because of the complexity of VRF systems, their equipment actually gets an additional year. So their compliance date is January 1st, 2026 to meet that 700 GWP target. Now, other industry partners like Hardy, they've done an excellent job on providing distributors like yourself or wholesalers guidance on whether the equipment's actually considered a packaged unit or if the system is considered field erected. Now, the package units actually have a 3-year sell-through of the older equipment, while the field erected air conditioning products have an installation deadline. And so that's what's going to be really important to understand the difference between a packaged product or field erected. If we move to the next slide, this is the commercial, right? And so once again, for the distributors or wholesalers that are managing commercial refrigeration equipment or commercial refrigeration contractors, this slide shows that the path to lower GWP products is a little more complicated, right? It shows that some refrigeration equipment, it does have to move to that lower GWP refrigerants starting January 1st, 2025, while other segments have until January 1st, 2028. So you have to go into the weeds to better understand all of the implementation dates in the different segments. But if we move to the next slide, I'm going to show a handful of slides that we don't go all the way into the weeds, but it helps understand an idea of the different identified GWP limits and their timelines that the product needs to transition to these new refrigerants. And so this slide right here shows self-contained equipment. It shows the compliance dates and the GWP targets. Now, as an example, the first line on the chart shows the residential and light commercial air conditioning segment. It says that an OEM has to select a refrigerant with a GWP of less than 700, and that's where Chris showed that one slide of, you know, pretty much on the air conditioning segment, who's going to R454B, and then the few remaining going R32. But it says the compliance date of that new equipment is January 1st, 2025. Now, since this is talking about packaged equipment like window units or PTAC units, things like that, the R410A equipment built prior to January 1st, 2025, the APA program gives the distributors or OEMs 3 years to sell through its inventory of equipment that contain the higher GWP refrigerant. Now, from a commercial refrigeration perspective, a segment shown, I think it's 3 lines further down on this chart, it lists vending machines. Now, this cutoff date is also January 1st, 2025. However, you can see that that GWP target is quite a bit lower than air conditioning. And that's where Chris mentioned that Chemours has products 454A, 454B, 454C. And in this case, that's where R454C would come into play, because Chris showed that that actually has a GWP of less than 150. Now, what you can see on this chart here is there's a question, and this question is very important to all the distributors and wholesalers on this call. If you're currently directly supplying a smaller OEM with refrigerant, like 404A or R407C for commercial refrigeration, or even R410A for smaller air conditioning systems, please get with our aftermarket sales team that Chris showed on one of the first couple slides, and let's work together and walk those OEMs on this journey to either move from R454A, R454B or R454C refrigerant. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Now I'll go on another slide. This is actually still on packaged units. And if you look all the way down to the bottom of this chart, you can see that small refrigerated cases, like what you'd find in a convenience store, they also have that January 1st, 2025 compliance date. And so once again, they may be a smaller OEM and they may not be coming directly to Chemours for refrigerant. They may be coming to you as a distributor or a wholesaler. So it's going to be very important for them to have a plan in place for implementing R454C into their products. So yeah, I can't stress it enough that if your organization is currently supporting smaller OEMs with refrigerant, now is the time to have those discussions on that refrigerant transition. If we move to the next slide, I think we are now going into something called, the next two slides are very similar to what we just showed, but this says field erected. And what this is a big difference. That compliance date that you see is the installed date of the equipment. Now you can see we made a correction on this slide from the original EPA transition rule, and we show that red correction on that first line of the chart. And this is where the industry as a whole came together and worked together to help the EPA understand that when this segment that you're showing right there builds close to like 10 million units a year, they needed an additional year to install all the R410A split system equipment. So right now, that's the only one that's gotten a change. So the information on the far left side is something I snagged from Hardy, and it does the explanation of the installation date, but it is only for residential and light commercial air conditioning equipment. VRF systems, commercial refrigeration systems, those still have to comply with the dates that are shown in these charts. So if you're building a field erected product, it's very important to get ahead of these dates because they're basically saying that the equipment has to be installed prior to that particular date, whatever the segment is. Okay, if we go to the next slide. This is like my final sector control slide, right? And once again, it's just a reminder that if you didn't hear me the first couple times, if your organization supports OEMs that build either package or field erected equipment, and you supply them with the refrigerant, not Chemours, Chemours is supplying you as a distributor or wholesaler with the refrigerant, and then you're passing it on to these smaller OEMs. It is critical that you get together with them. If you need our support, we can do that, but it's critical that they get started on this transition discussion to understand they've got to move away from higher GWP refrigerants to lower GWP refrigerants, in some cases as soon as January 1st, 2025. Okay, all right, next slide. So we're not the only ones as far as a resource to go through in this transition, right? Chemours has been supporting industry partners like AHRI for nearly 10 years on this A2L journey. So the QR code that's shown on this slide will take you to AHRI's map for codes and standard guidance. You'd click on each individual state and it will provide information related to where the state's progress is in adopting A2L installations inside their codes and standards. So if we go to the next slide, I actually just clicked on one. And this example here is what provided for distributors and contractors. And the new equipment, so it can go in, these A2L installations can go in as smoothly as possible. So I just did an example. The state of Arizona, they have the standards and codes in place to successfully install new A2L equipment. Now, you can see there the website shows the first piece of information is actually the legislation. You can click on that and it talks about how the state has approved or allowed A2L installations. And then you can see as you go farther down on that information, it shows the codes that guide the A2L installations. So this is where I think it's going to be really important for you to click on your states and look at the position on A2L equipment, and then, you know, include this in your equipment A2L training, which, as Chris showed, there's a couple stars on there, you know, already releasing products. So I'm assuming A2L OEM equipment training is going to be starting very, very soon. It would be a good source to be able to point to the contractors and say, hey, you know, Arizona or Ohio, you know, here's where the codes and standards are. If you get any pushback from the local AHJs or, you know, something, you can guide them through the process, maybe on the first one or, you know, first couple ones. But it is a transition, and all the things are in place, whether it's ASHRAE to help with the installation or UL to help with the equipment. I'll show a slide here. I think if we go to the next slide, yeah, we go to the next slide. These next two slides are the industry guidance on the A2L refrigerant storage and what it's going to look like. So much like I said, ASHRAE standard 15 is the installation of the equipment. UL is the equipment design. The NFPA and the IFC are the two organizations that, you know, different states. I think the IFC is like 40 of the states, and the NFPA is, you know, some of the remaining states that what they use for storage of, you know, different types of flammable fluids or different fluids. And so all the information is in place in both the NFPA and the IFC. It just depends where your state is as far as the adoption process of those latest fire code standards. So it'd be a very good idea to have a chat with your local AHJ or fire marshal, and you walk them through this storage of the A2L refrigerants. If you've got all the information, you can provide it to them. It's more than likely they just look at it and say, yep, you're doing the right processes. So if we go to the next slide, this is the back of that trifold that's been out for a couple years. If you don't have it, you can download this directly from the AHRI website, and it just shows the newest information outlined within the IFC or the NFPA documents as to the amount of refrigerant a facility can store. And this just depends on certain conditions, like whether your facility has sprinklers or whether you have something called controlled areas. So what I'd recommend is have your facility manager of your different locations review this latest IFC or NFPA codes for your area, as well as utilizing this document that you can download from AHRI and prepare your site for the A2L refrigerant storage. Get everybody aligned and on board as you're bringing in these new A2L refrigerants. All right, go to the next slide. And so I think, yep, I finished my portion of today's session by highlighting another industry partner that Chemours support, and that's Hardy. If you haven't seen this yet, Hardy has created a pretty cool tool here for industry partners to use. It's related to questions on the A2L refrigerant transition. So when you utilize the code on the slide, it'll ask a user for a few questions, and it'll take you to a page where you can type in your question, and within a very short period of time, it will deliver an industry-aligned reply. So definitely try this tool out. Ask any A2L question that you could think of. However, if you come across a refrigerant-related question that the tool can't answer, or you don't feel like it definitely explained it deep enough, just get with one of our aftermarket representatives, and we'll work with you to get the answer. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Don Gillis, who will update you on the latest information related to working with the A2L refrigerant. So Don, it's all yours.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jeff. I appreciate it. Great job, by the way, both of you. I'm Don Gillis. I help with training here at Chemours. Next slide, please. So what's it going to look like in your truck? PPE, quite honestly, not a big difference here. The one I'm going to point out to is going to be your Class B fire extinguisher. Pretty much common sense on all this. If lockout, tag out, it comes into play, obviously we're going to do that. Those kind of things. Not much to go over, really, to be honest with you, on the safety stuff right now. Next slide, please. Service trucks. I wish there was more wow factor here, but let's just talk about it. Under the materials of trade, it's business as usual. And what do I mean by that? It's the same restrictions that were in place before, 440 pounds total, regardless of the hazards. So that's not in one tank, obviously, but out of all the tanks. That includes your settling and everything like that. These are some myths that we've met in the field for about the last year and a half or so. There will be no placards needed on the service vehicles. I'm not talking about box trucks and semis. These are the service vehicles, kind of like the picture shows you there on the slide. No ventilation required. That's another one I've heard before. So that's a myth. A2L tanks will be able to lay horizontally. We have a special permit for that. We've actually done the work for our competitors. All they have to do is apply for it. So pretty much everything there. So if you hear anything about A2L tanks have to be upright, that there's no truth to that, as long as they get their permit number, okay? And Chemours has done all the homework for them. They just got to apply for it. Next slide, please, Corey. To bang through these lines, if you would, please. Let's get down to here. This is all things. I'm just going to walk through each one of these when we get to the bottom here. So the same thing holds true. The only thing difference in this picture, obviously, is the tank. You see the A2L tank there, okay? Recommended, it's going to be recommended. This comes from UL 2-40. If you want to see it, it's an HH. It's going to recommend a 10-foot safe work area. Quite honestly, that's kind of been around for a long time as far as our areas that we're going to, that we work in. Similar to what you see at utility companies, they're working out on the corner. You see the orange cones or the yellow tape, that's required. Right now, they're just recommending. The only exception to that I know of is if you're working on a very large chiller, for example, those recovery machines can throw a bigger spark. So those need to be 20 foot outside the work zone, okay? Charge with the blend refrigerants in liquid state, just like before. Before, calculate your weigh-in charge. Always weigh the charge in. Stay with initial charge on your liquid service ports. Verify airflow, airflow, airflow. Anyone that's seen me teach before, I must repeat that 6 zillion times. Remember that. After you start up, you need the liquid charge on the suction service port. Make sure you don't slug that compressor, all right? I like these little blue things that are on the screen. I have no affiliation with them. You hook them on the tank instead of using your calibrated wrist, if you will, to throttle that gas and then shut it down and wait for it to stabilize for 15 minutes. This thing trickles in real slow. It's nice to have. Again, I have no affiliation with them, but you should be able to find it in your stores, actually. Use charging PT charts to calculate, subcooling, superheat. Did I mention airflow? Airflow, airflow, airflow. We're going to want you then, or the OEM is, label match everything for the A2Ls and then keep the literature inside the door. That's going to be very important moving forward. It's always been important, but you'll see why here in a few slides. Next slide, please, Corey. Oh, yeah, calibrating your gauges. Can you back up? If you calibrate your gauges, just a real fun fact here. I share this with everywhere I go. If you ever want to know, or if you want to share this with younger contractors, the people in the colleges, vocational schools, simply to calibrate any gauges, whether they're digital or compound gauges, you need saturated refrigerant, right? Saturated refrigerant can be just one drop of liquid in vapor. So if you just hook up to a tank of gas, let's say 454B, set it for 454B, take a temperature reading on the side of the tank. Now, we don't want it to be 120 degrees on a rooftop. We don't want it to be minus 30 or anything crazy. 70 degrees, somewhere thereabouts. If you're not spot on, you should be fairly close. It's a great tool I used to use when I checked recovery tanks to make sure that it was all what the service technician said it was. Next slide, please. So again, the second law of thermodynamics is going to hold true for 454B, A, and C, right? Hot's going to go to cold, high pressure is going to go to low pressure, and if you're into IAQ, wet's going to go to dry. Okay, we're going to come through the same thing as far as rejection, absorbing heat, nothing really changed. Now, obviously, if you're working with 454B or any of the 454 series, the TXVs are going to have a different setting. Just like anytime we change a different refrigerant, there's going to be a slight difference in pressures, drops. Those systems and that refrigerant are designed for that pressure drop solely. So next slide, please. And advance, if you will, about 4 or 5 times. Everything underneath, how similar, if you would, Corey. So you can see on the PT chart there in the middle, on the green chart there, we're comparing 454B with 410A, backup one, if you would. There you go. Thank you. 410A, and you can see it looks almost identical to it. Again, not a big deal. To me, moving from R22 to 410A, which was much more difficult, in my opinion, being in the field at that time, than it is what we're going to see now. And I mean that sincerely. Very similar pressure temperature profiles, thermodynamics almost exactly, similar material compatibility. In other words, the 454B is made up of R32, which is half of 410A. The other part of the 454B, the 30-some% of it, is going to be 1234YF, which is in our automobiles. So it plays well with others. We know it's not going to eat up windings. We know it's not going to eat up aluminum, copper, and those kind of things. As far as oil, I just recently changed this from similar to exact, because when it comes to 410A to 454B, it's going to stay at a POE 32. Similar architectures as any of the systems before. I think Chris mentioned, or Jeff mentioned earlier, we're going to have a 78% reduction moving from 410A to 454B alone. That's huge. Wrap your head around that. That's a big deal. Next slide, please, Corey. So advance twice, if you would, show the red arrow, and then I just chose the pressure that I thought would be fair to all three of these. I added 32 because you're going to see all of them, obviously. So if I choose 117 on the low side, that's our suction saturated pressure, or that's our pressure gauge on our low side. Our suction saturated temperature for 410A would be approximately 39.4. In the same comparison, if we had 454B in this system at the same amp, everything exact, it would be 44.6, and then R32 would be 38.3. So nothing really earth-shattering there. I know from my experience, the higher the SEER ratings have gotten over the year, the higher we go up in that temperature on the suction saturation temperature on evap. Typically, you're going to be somewhere between 40, 45 degrees on a well-running system in a normal application, not on startup, obviously, with a high load. Next slide, please. So if you advance that and put the red boxes in, the capacity there, 156 to 152 to 171. So we lose a little capacity in the 454B. Advance the slide one more. And capacity, we all understand, we talk about that a lot, but the biggest one, in my opinion, coming from the compressor side of the world for years, is the COP, and it stands for the coefficient of performance. And the higher that number is, the more efficient that refrigerant is, or more efficient that compressor is with the refrigerant that it's using. So the way I explain COP, it's quite simple, if you will. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It's simply this: how much capacity are you getting out of your evaporator compared to how much energy you're using for the compressor? And the higher that number is the best of all, okay? So at 410A, we would take 3.58 compared to 454B is 3.68, and then R32 would be 3.65. So it not only takes the capacity in, but how much energy or emissions, how fast is that electrometer running around the clock on the home or the building that you're using, okay? Suction pressures, go advanced. So again, nothing earth shattering here. I'd love to have a wow factor here, but pretty much like for like, 130 on 410A, 127 for 454B, and then 133 for R32. Next, advance. Discharge pressure, pretty much the same thing here. We're a little higher on that 410A and the R32. We're gonna run a little lower on the 454B, as you can tell, on the low and high side. We're gonna be about 395, which is not a bad thing, actually. Discharge temperature, advance the slide. Here's where I really take a liking to this, or take an interest in this, because coming from the compressor world, again, we always know we don't want that discharge line 6 inches out on the compressor higher than 225 degrees. And the reason for that is we lose somewhere between 50 to 75 degrees of heat in the hottest point of the compressor. So if we take in consideration 75 degrees as the worst scenario and add it to that 225, we get the number 300. And if you've been to any of our training in the past, you know that at 300 degrees, we start to lose our lubricity, whether it's a scroll or reciprocating. So at 410A, we're gonna have around 179. That's the world we're used to. 454B is gonna run a little hotter because we removed that R125 that was in there, that was a fire deterrent, if you will. And it also keeps the discharge line cool, because moving over to R32, 215, R32 runs hot by itself. So if we can advance to the next slide, I'll show you what that's gonna mean to an R32. Not that this is a bad thing, because there's a lot, you know, the pros and cons for everything. But if you look at the, advance the slide, please. So first of all, glide. Let's talk about glide. because there's been a lot of conversation about glide. Well, it's a blend, it's got a lot of glide. It doesn't really have much more glide, honestly, than 410A. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. And these numbers, depending on whether it's an air conditioner or heat pump, these numbers are going to change. So we're less than a half a degree of 410A. We don't take in consideration, we don't use bubble point, we don't use dew point. We move over to 454B. Again, depending on what application you're in with this air conditioner or heat pump, you might see it anywhere from 1.4 to 2 or somewhere thereabouts. R32 obviously is a single component, so you won't see any kind of glide. The glide is simply the difference between the boiling points. Let's move down to the next one. In fact, let's go down to the next two, if you will. Go down to the POE oil, if you would. Appreciate it, Corey. POE 32, again, like for like, 410A, 454B. The components are fairly same inside that blend. Not a lot going on. We just bumped up that R32 from 50% to 68.9, I believe it is. But on the R32, again, it's going to have a higher viscosity oil because it runs a little warmer by nature. That's what it does, okay? So you'll have 3 different models at your store. If at the counter, you're going to have a model number. Let's say it's with Copeland, you're going to have a model number for 410A, an A1 classification. You're going to have a replacement model for 454B for A2Ls, and then there's going to be some different parts changes in there too, by the way. So I don't want to get into that today, but there is going to be some mechanical changes slightly inside that compressor. And then R32 is going to be a big difference on the POE oil, and that will make a difference on that heavier oil, that higher viscosity will play havoc on something that should have POE 32 in it. And then last but not least, that's why we're having this conversation today, the POE, the GWP. You can see, as Jeff and Chris has already talked about, 2008 for 410A, 466 for 454B, 676 for R32. Remember, that cap is at 700 right now for residential or comfort cooling. Next slide, please. Advance the slide about 4 times, if you will. Perfect. Condenser, stop right there. So I'm going to use this. This is a snippet of how you do sensible or latent heat. Obviously, sensible heat is something we can sense. The thermostat goes up a degree. We have an air conditioning. The contactor pulls in. It senses that 1 degree. Latent heat, on the other hand, is changing state without changing temperature. So in the case, if this was a pan of boiling water, okay. And water has a refrigerant number too. It's R718. Chillers and those boiler guys, they really like water. They talk about it a lot. So 212 degrees, and theoretically or actually at atmospheric pressure 14.7, it's a single component. It will boil off for 212 degrees until it gets to this suction line here, okay? And that 1 degree that we get, once that last droplet of liquid goes to steam or vapor, will be 1 degree of sensible heat or 1 degree of superheat. Next slide, please. I use that to set up glide. And the reason I do it, I found it to be the easiest comparing it to R718 or water. So on the left side of the screen, you see a single component. That could be R32 or water or whatever, and then you have azeotropic blends, a big fancy word for blends that boil similar, hence 410A, 454B. And that's like a straight line. It's not a big enough difference to really take it in consideration, okay? But if you move over to the right hand of the slide, the non-azeotropic blends, we typically just call them blends and keep it simple. You might have a blend is defined by 2 components or more, and each one of them is going to have a slightly different boiling temperature. I say slightly, it's going to be close. In some cases, it's going to be drawn out. And you could have blends as much as like 4 or 5 blends in there, or 4 or 5 components inside that blend. So if you start at the left side of that where you see the subcooling or on the bubble point, you use the bubble point for subcooling, bub sub. So let's say that line that's going up there where it says subcooled liquid, let's say that's the liquid line. It hits that metering device. We'll pretend this is our evaporator. And let's say it has 5 components in there. The highest, the most volatile, if you will start to boil first, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5. As it gets to the top of that line and goes to that solid black arrow, if you draw a line left there, that dotted line where it says glide, the difference between the first boiling point and the last boiling point, whatever that is, that's your temperature glide. So it could be 8, it could be 12. 407C is like 12 degrees in most cases in a lot of applications. So 407C is something we commonly work with. If you grab the bubble point on 407C and you're doing superheat, you're going to be in big time trouble. So just remember, I know you all know this already, do SU for superheat and then sub for subcooling, okay? Next slide, please. What's changing? Let's go ahead and look at that. Tools, 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 and more tools. The thing I'll say about tools, this started out with like one tool manufacturer, maybe two, and Jeff can verify this. When I got here, I think he already had this established. Everywhere I went, there would be a tool manufacturer, inevitably they'd come up and say, hey, you know, we sell that stuff too. So it's starting to look like a NASCAR. But the takeaway from here is, don't buy anything, don't have any of your customers buy anything that's not rated or A2L compliant, I think is the word they're using, okay? When in doubt, have them go to the manufacturer website or look it up for them. I've been pleasantly surprised seeing nothing really jumping out at me that says, hey, that new recovery machine you just bought 2 years ago has to go. I think, you know, like one gentleman told me, I won't mention the product's name, but he said, ours has always been A2L rated, and he kind of grinned at me, which is true. Nothing was ever meant to leak, right? So they just put it through the testing, it passed with flying colors. So 5 years model might be this year's new model, but make sure you're moving forward, all your customers are buying everything that's A2L rated. Okay, next slide, please. If you pop through these, there you go. Always file manufacturer literature required. Use inert gas to remove any residual refrigerant existing line. Now that's always been good practice and recommended, but now it's going to be required. Now, before you ask me who's going to police that, I don't know. It's kind of like we used to say when people would release refrigerant, who's going to catch me? You know, the EPA police. But just know that you have to use inert gas, removing that residual exit line. That's going to be required now. Ensure equipment is grounded. Use proper capacity discharge method. Are you starting to see a theme here? This is kind of stuff we grew up on if you worked in the field. And I know a lot of people that work at wholesalers started out in the field. Use only OEM approved A2L replacement parts. Install a new liquid line filter dryer. Anytime you open up a system, I mean, to me, it's just a no-brainer. Put the liquid line filter dryer in there, right? Use nitrogen before, during brazing. Recharge the system by weighing in the charge. Always weigh that in. If you care to know what it is for 454B, so I think we use, what is it, 0.06 for 410A. So moving forward, 454B will be like 0.055, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But it's very, very close. So if you keep the same multiplier as before for the density that you were using at 410A, you'll still be all right. Put that document information inside the equipment door, and always you leave the installation manual with the equipment. And that's been around since the beginning. Next slide, please. So the tanks, we're going to left-handed threads. We have a picture there of 454B, our 454B on the A2Ls will be a left-handed threads. You can see the adapter we're using there on the right-hand side, CGA 164 for the DACs. Everything else stays the same. Obviously, we're removing that color and putting that red band around there. So that'll be significant when you see that. Advance the next slide, please. This is something Jeff offered up to me yesterday, and basically the same takeaway. You'll have your adapters also for your larger tanks. These are some tanks, actually, cylinders for the R&D at Chemours, but just know that you have those adapters. Next slide, please. Advance one more time. So my last slide, I believe, is right here. And all I want to say is we have lots of resources out there at optin.com. You can get training through this porthole. You can get anything in the literature that you see out there. Anything that Jeff or Chris talked about earlier, you can more than likely find. I want to throw a shout out to my friend, Dr. Chuck Allgood. Great little videos, less than 5 minutes, usually around 3, easy to digest. It's called Check Up with Dr. Chuck on our YouTube channel. Very, very good stuff. It's actually small little tidbits of what we've already talked for the last hour. So if you would like to sign up for Opteon A2L refrigerant news, go to opteon.com. It comes out, I think, bi-weekly, if I'm not mistaken. Hey, if you don't like it, delete it. No big deal, but I find good information on there. Of course, we've got our tech support. I think you all know how to get a hold of us. And I believe that's all I have, gang.
That is awesome, and I appreciate you. Thank you very much, Don. I appreciate all your information. It was a lot. That's a lot of meat right there. So yeah, I'm glad it was recorded. I'll tell you that. So again, audience, if you do need to go back and review some of that stuff, especially with a contractor or some of your favorite contractors, right? Just kind of go down through that information. It's comforting to know what's staying the same, and it's comforting to know what's changing. And something that, just real quick, before we get into any questions, I do want to talk about two different things. One is if you go over to the little bar on the side of your monitor where it says handouts, there's 5 handouts in there. Those are the PDFs that you can download, okay? And if you open them up, I'm gonna open them up. You're gonna see that there's the PT chart for air conditioning is there, and 454B is on there along with R32, R22, everybody's on there. A lot of folks like the paper one. We've got tons of paper ones, but since everybody's got a phone in their pocket, if you can't find the PT chart on an app, you can have this PDF file on there, and you can zoom it up so you can. It's not so hard to read, right? You can really dial in on the information you're looking for by having this PT chart handy. There's also one for commercial refrigeration. And then there's a little bit more information about XL20 and XL40. That's 454A and 454C. It's more like engineering information, right? If you really want to dig into the technical information, those are product information bulletins. We call it a PIB, and that's what it is, product information bulletin. So if you're looking for some more information on that, you can dig in there. Those are handy to download and to send out to your customers as well. And then the last part on there is the final rule fact sheet. And they say fact sheet, but essentially what it is a summary, right? So the final rule may be 1,000 pages long, right? But the final rule fact sheet is basically the important stuff compressed into 2 pages. And that's where the charts that you saw from Jeff and the charts that you saw from myself, that's where we're gonna see a lot of those charts is gonna be on those fact sheets. So those are really good PDF handouts that you can download anytime. And I wanted to make you aware of those. And then also, Don, if you could tell us a little bit about this this QR code that's up right over my head.
Yeah, so this is thanks, Chris. So this, if you scan this QR code, this is something we're using in the classroom all across the nation, the STAM team and Chris and others and Jeff and what have you. If you scan this, it'll take you to an evaluation sheet. It'll also ask you if you want to do a project, so you can send your customers here. If you don't want to do a project, just say no, fill it out, and we're actually taking that information and making our training better, so it's in real time as opposed to filling out sheets and have to turn them in and what have you. So it's real quick. Our coworker Shelly's doing a great job with this information and gives it great feedback back to us in graphs. So fill it out, scan it if you would, and tell us what you thought. If there's something that, like I always say in the classroom, that you think we could have done more or you would like to see, please add it to there. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, let's get into some questions. First thing, there's an audience member by the name of, let's see, Phil. Yes, Phil was wondering if the safety area around the unit that you were discussing, is that 10 inches? Or 10 feet?
Did I have it on there? Oh, my Lord. You know what's so funny about that? Thank you, Bill. I'm embarrassed now. You know what's so funny about that sad story, but I like making fun of myself, is somebody pointed that out to me last week and I forgot to change it. It's 10 foot and I do apologize. Thank you for reminding me of that. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Everybody's always watching.
Okay. Good job.
So then there's another question that came in regarding 500 GWP. There's been talk about this for the past few years. The question is, let me read it off. Is there talk about a cap for residential cooling going down to 500 GWP in the next few years? And as far as crystal balls go, our crystal ball is pretty foggy when it comes to what's going to happen off in the future. But what I can tell you is that the EPA moves slowly. They know how long it's going to take to change after this change that's going on right now, and it's not going to be in a couple of years. We're not done with this change, right? So the EPA, we're still waiting for the EPA to come out with final rulings on this stuff. So to talk about another step down for all these OEMs, Train, Carrier, all these major manufacturers, to ask them to step down again within a couple of years is not a conversation that's happening right now. So while we can't tell you what's going to happen 3 presidential terms from now, right, mid 2030s, I can tell you that right now there's no talk about that step down for GWP caps coming up.
But it does, Chris, it does bring up a good point that, you know, a lot of the OEMs have selected 454B that is under 500. And I think that the concern is that any OEM that is selected R32, would they have to go through that pain of a transition from 32 to 454B? And so you know, that's like Chris said, it's hard to predict the future, but that's why a lot of OEMs selected 454B as one, because less than 500 GWP, and two, because so much of the information that Don talked about is that 454B is so similar to 410A that, you know, oils and architecture and all that stuff really hasn't changed. So, you know, that's just, once again, some of the rumor mill stuff out there, but that's, you know, hard. Yeah, the crystal ball's in the shop right now, by the way, Chris. It is all in the shop. So.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I do appreciate that. I do lose track of, doesn't matter, we would meet it anyway, right? 454B would meet it anyway. So, but no, there's no real, no line on that one yet. Let's see, I'm just looking over here for some more questions. All right. I am seeing, Don. There's a gentleman named Barry who's wondering if there's a slide deck available for training contractors. There was a lot of information that you had, didn't know if there was a slide deck available.
Yeah, does his last name start with a K?
I cannot confirm or deny any knowledge of any name.
Yeah. Anyways, yes, we have something for the contractors. We were just talking about it. Mark Love, if he's on the call, he's probably grinning right now. We're talking about putting a small deck together to have a something small that the counter people or wholesalers can show to contractors to kind of the meat and potatoes, if you will, Chris. Yeah. Yes, okay. Great question. And if you want to, I guess, Chris, how would they get that question to us, or how would we follow up with us? I'll let you drive now.
Sure. Well, I do like the training feedback form. That's always a great way, because that's going to capture the person's name, their email address, a way to really get in touch and find out what their needs are. But then also you have the conversation about what is available. You know what I mean? What is available for contractors? Can we do something virtual? Is there something that's already recorded they just need to show? Or are you going to be in town anytime soon, right? There's a lot of different conversations to have once we are able to get into a conversation about it.
So Chris, I just seen one, someone was saying something about the A2L refrigerant storage. So I referenced an AHRI trifold document. So if you go to the AHRI website, and I think Don's last slide showed that you can get to the Safe Refrigerant Transition Task Force. There you can find that trifold. But I would, if you're a Hardy member, I would highly recommend giving that Ask A2L website about A2L storage, because you've got A2L refrigerant storage, and you've got A2L equipment storage. And, you know, like I say, the website is being fed by industry experts, and then there's some AI involved. And so far, I've been really impressed with the Hardy Ask A2L information.
Very good. And to add on to that, and I don't know if it actually changes what you just said, but the equipment with refrigerant in there is considered a finished good. So it is not going to be part of that 10,000 pounds of A2R flammable refrigerant storage. So it's going to be separated. So if you've got 100 condensing units over on the back wall, that does not count as part of your storage quantity, your maximum allowable quantity. So I hope that helps.
Hey, Chris, one thing, if you don't mind, I would be curious with the people that are, it looks like there's less than 200 on now, but if there would be ever any interest to have more of these, like quarterly or something like that. I'm just curious if there would be any interest in that at all, if I may.
Yeah, that's a great question. If you have thoughts on that, toss it in the chat, toss it in the question center. Just you know, yes, more, or quarterly, or do it every week, maybe every morning, like a morning show. We could talk about it. Whatever how much use you can see out of this, please let us know, because right now we're doing it twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. We are past the top of the hour, so we're going to start seeing attendees drop off. But if you are interested in sticking around for some more questions, feel free to toss them in, and we do have a couple lined up.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, can a fire marshal approve all our branches? I guess that means, like, can a fire marshal, like, if you're in Kentucky and you've got 10 branches in Kentucky, is there like a state level fire marshal that can just sign off on it, or do you need to do it in each
I would think it might have to be a local AHJ type of thing, but I know that AHRI as well as Chemours is working through being able to provide, like, if you're in the state of Kentucky, here's the document and here's the exact location. So, you know, it would point, whether it's the local AHJ or the state fire marshal, you know, to the right location. And maybe it is a part to where, you know, the state fire marshal can do a blanket, you know, type of thing. And if you get that, then your local OHJ, if he comes in and says, you know, you're not storing these A2L refrigerants correctly, you say, well, here's the state fire marshal and he's blessed it. And so, you know, there's some, it's going to be a little bit of education. You know, we've got everything in place, but it is going to take a little bit of work to, whether it's the codes and standards for the actual installation, or whether it's some of the things related to, you know, OSHA or the fire department. But I think it's going to be kind of a, you know, once you do it, it's done. So it's going to be an education. And maybe if you're proactive versus, you know, waiting before somebody, you know, says you're doing it wrong, it's better, always better to do proactive. So stay tuned, though. I know that AHRI is working on updating that trifold document and then also updating that map. And there may be some more meat to it for either the NFPA or depending on if you may be doing the IFC. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I hope that answers the question. Actually, we've gotten a lot of good responses of people asking for this thing quarterly, which is actually really cool. That's great advice. I mean, great feedback. I appreciate it. A question that also just came in, are there going to be sensors installed in the indoor coil? Thank you very much, Jeffrey. This is a question. Okay. I'll let Dawn answer what's happening with the units out of the shop. That's going to be number one, right? What are you going to see in the boxes for the new installations? But then also, Don, if you could talk about repairing or replacing a coil, like I guess what am I trying to say? If you're replacing a coil on a 454B system in the future, what are you going to have to do? Let's just say that there's a gas furnace and you're replacing the coil. Like what's a contractor looking at with that kind of a job? Yeah. If you can talk to that, that's a common one.
Yeah, I think I can. So let's start with the new equipment first. So at the very minimum, depending on who the OEM is, you're going to have a sensor up around the evaporator coil. And depending on which way that airflow is going, whether it's an air handler or a furnace, is going to depend on which side of the coil that sensor is. Now, some OEMs are stating that it's already going to be mounted inside the coil box, and they'll have a location on the other side of the coil box if you want to lay it horizontally, for example. And then some folks are telling us along the way that it's going to be in a bag of goodies like you get with your miscellaneous parts for the furnace and air conditioner and so on and so forth. Now that sensor, you know, that LFL is lower flammable limit. It cannot ignite until it hits that. That's the threshold of it. Okay, you need the right concentration, the right air, and then you need some for ignition. The sensor is going to be 20% of the LFL. Okay, so it's going to go off at that indicator there. It's going to sense that in the coil box, and then it's going to energize the letter G, which is the fan, to ventilate that to remove the concentration. If it's in heating mode on an air handler, it's going to deactivate the heat strips. If it's in heating mode in a gas furnace, it's going to deactivate the gas valve. The outdoor unit will shut off. The fan will run for a certain length of time. I can't speak for all OEMs. It gets as that sense that it's cleared out, let's say 5 minutes for the sake of not arguing. It then goes back into activation. Now, don't hold me to that for all the OEMs because they're not all exactly the same. But the magical number I'm hearing, and please tell me different, Jeff or Chris, seems to be about 20% seems to be the sweet spot of the LFL. So that's the one correct thing. Now, on the new equipment, Chris and I were at a few expos here recently together, and I went over and talked to the let's say, what am I trying to say here? What's the replacement coil manufacturer? Oh my Lord.
Like All Style or First Company type thing?
Oh,
I
it's a
won't
popular
say.
name. I've used them many a times. I can't think of it as. It's anyways, the replacement coil companies are going to have a kit that comes with that. I actually took pictures of it, and those kind of things. Now the OEMs, you'll use that. You'll buy the coil, and I believe, if not mistaken, you'll use the sensor from the existing if they already had one on there. Is from what I'm hearing. Chris, have you heard anything differently on that from the OEMs? You might be muted, Chris.
No, I've heard nothing differently.
Okay. All right. Yeah. ADP coils. Pardon me. My mind went blank. Yeah. ADP coils already got the coils set up for your replacements for the kits in place. So if you don't replace the furnace, in other words, and you go with 454B, you'll be able to have that. They'll have a kit ready to go into that board that's already in there. In your furnace, you'll put that in there. Now, depending on the OEM, some of them are having an extra board, a mitigation board, if you will. Some OEMs are actually included in the motherboard. So depending on who your OEM is. So I can't speak for all of them again. Obviously, we're not the equipment manufacturers, but just from listening to working around them, like Chris does a lot, and Jeff, I've learned a few things on that it seemed to be repeating themselves. So hopefully I answered your question.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Don. I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
do have another one that is right up your alley, Don.
Okay.
Our friend Eric is asking about laying the cylinders down. Can you please state that the allowance for this, given that the DOT regulates the pressure relief device with the bill specific? Oh, we've been talking about that a ton at these recent shows.
Yeah, and you were breaking up a little bit. It was talking about why you're allowed to lay this on the side.
I think so. Yeah, I think that was. It looks like the sensor. Yeah.
Can you talk more about the pressure relief device in the?
Oh yeah. Oh my bad. Okay, so
Are you not
the
able to hear
tanks.
me?
Yeah, the tanks that we know before all had like a ruptured disc on it. And the way the ruptured disc works is it gets above, everyone throws the temperature 130 degrees around, but really it's based on pressure because every refrigerant's going to have a different pressure temperature, right? But they use that 130 degrees or 125 for storage temperature. That's where that number comes from. But I see a lot of instructors throw that out there that, if your truck temperature. But anyways, the way the ruptured disc works, it gets above that pressure, that temperature, that ruptured disc pops, with an A1 refrigerant like 410A, and it blows the whole charge. And that's the old style. The new style, and they weren't required to do this. I just learned this about a month ago from Tony. That wasn't a requirement. It was just an extra step that they've taken, and they already do that on the larger tanks anyways. But what it is if you understand relief valves, it's a spring-loaded relief valve. And I use the word burp because that's what they do. If it gets into that, well, it's called danger zone, if you will, of getting the higher pressure, it will release the little bit of pressure off there and then close down. And they've been used for years. They're used all around already. But again, it wasn't required. They took the extra step on that. And so that's the way that works. What did I miss there? So if you didn't have a tank rupturing before, I want to emphasize this, you're not going to have a tank rupturing now. Here in Ohio, where I'm at, it's never happened to me. I don't know anybody that has happened, but if you teach down in Southern Florida or Arizona or even Alabama, Southern Alabama, it can happen. And I've heard it many times in the classroom. So it doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen because you get those temperatures there. So you know your environment better than we do. So whatever you were doing before, you're pretty much going to do again. Now, where that came in play, if you don't mind, Chris, on the vertical stuff, is there was concern that if that relief valve with the A2L refrigerants, even though it's closely in the flammability of A1s, is if it was at that 6 o'clock position that your liquid might slide up against there and possibly send it off prematurely. So they wanted everything upright to have a vapor barrier there. We did all the testing. I can blow Chemours' horn. Actually, Chris and I just came off a meeting earlier to the actual people that did that. And they did the homework. They petitioned it with the Department of Transportation, and they've got a permit number. We applied, we got that permit number on our tanks, which Chris is heavily involved in, and you will be able to lay that horizontally. So check with your manufacturer, make sure they have that permit number. Not saying our refrigerant's better than anyone else's, but just so you know, we have a permit. So if you hear A2L refrigerants have to be vertical, it depends who you're talking to, I guess. It depends who's in the room.
Don, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. If I'm still lagging or still breaking up, just wave your hands. I apologize about all that.
No worries.
We do have a question from Jeff for Jeff about the Hardy thing. What's up with that Hardy thing again? Can you just tell us a little bit more about the Hardy AI tool?
So they decided to put together something, and they asked the industry experts. You know, they came to Chemours about A2L refrigerant warehousing. They came to equipment manufacturers, you know, for about the A2L. So if you just go to the Hardy website, if you're a Hardy member, and you go, you'll be able to see the newest thing that they have. It's called Ask A2L. And like I say, it'll ask you one or two questions, you know, who you are and your email address, but then it'll go in and you can type, or if you're on your phone, you could actually speak into it and just ask a question about the A2L related transition. And like I say, it's got a huge database, and it takes just a few seconds for it to think, and then it'll reply. And like I say, what I like about a lot of the information that Hardy's done is, you know, not only does Alex Ayers and others there at Hardy really good at what they do, but they also, you know, look to industry experts to help populate some of that information. So yeah, just I highly recommend, if you're a member of Hardy, to go on there, search for Ask A2L, and some really good information and it's a consistent, right? That's what we need to do is, you know, Don can't be out training every day of the week. But if you can go to a source that's got a consistent message, and Hardy is a great resource, or AHRI is a great resource, then the whole industry can have the same answer and proceed forward. So hopefully that answered that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yep.
We do have another question. How many pounds on a pallet? I guess we were talking about the storage limit of 10,000 pounds. When we're talking about pallets, what are we talking about? I saw the question, I did the math. We're talking about 12 and a half pallets. Okay, so 10,000 pounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, based on the trifold, right? 10,000 pounds is, you don't need a sprinkler system. But if you do want to do more than 12 pallets of A2L refrigerants, you would just need a sprinkler system and maybe some kind of control zone. Don, can you talk about that a little bit?
That would probably be more of a Jeff question. Did you say Don or Jeff?
I said Jeff. Jeff, could you please talk about that?
Yeah, I think the control zone,
I appreciate that, because he worried me there a little bit. That's Jeff's stronger than I am at that.
I think, like you say, you have to understand what a controlled area is, and, you know, whether it's a concrete wall or whether it's got, you know, 2-hour fire rated drywall, you know, type of thing. So you got to kind of go into the weeds on what a controlled area looks like. So yeah, but Chris, I do believe all the refrigerant coming out now is in 20-pound capacity.
That's correct. Yep.
So I don't have the math, you know, as far as how many pounds or how many cylinders are on a skid, because we had a
40.
skid of 10A.
20 pounds in a jug, 40 cylinders on a skid.
Okay, very good.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate that.
Yep.
We have another question that just came in. Oh, it's not a question. Jeff, it's specifically for you.
Okay.
Our friend Barry says that he's used the Hardy A2L AI site, and it's been very helpful. He highly recommends trying it out. So that's awesome feedback. I appreciate that. I know we were in a beta testing phase for a little bit, and there was some feedback. But if the general public's able to get on there, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been live, I think I'm going to say less than 2 weeks. So, you know, the latest information. So thanks, Barry, for it's a really neat tool.
That is Barry. I just saw his last name. Hi, Barry.
I don't see any other questions. Does anybody have any hot topics? Don or Jeff, is there anything ringing the bell that you've thought about while we were going through this that you'd like to just kind of hit on?
Wow. I'd say for me, like I said, the air conditioning segment, everybody's pretty aligned, and 454B is definitely the majority. January 1st, 2025 is coming very quickly. But if you've got questions on the commercial refrigeration and you do a lot more of that than you do air conditioning as a distributor or wholesaler, I'd invite you to click on that QR code that's on the screen right now and just say you want to talk more about commercial refrigeration, because it is more complicated. The journey's 2025 to 2028, and it's definitely sector control driven by GWPs. But the good news is we've got the refrigerants that fit in those different segments or sectors. So that would be my one extra piece of the discussion.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I would just add on my thoughts on it. What my parting thoughts on it would be, like, if you're looking for training come fall or winter, I would suggest getting those requests in now. We're already locking weeks away for the October and November of this year, and December, and knowing what I know in the past from doing this for a while, that will snowball really quick. So if you're interested in training, get with your TMs or whatever, or go to our training page and start requesting that training now in advance, because it'll fill up quick. That's all I have, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Let's see, going back to 454A and 454C, we're at an interesting time, and it was pointed out to me, right? I've only been in AC for 17 years, really, just at the end of like R22, right? And it's only been HVAC. So commercial refrigeration, news to me, right? But what I was told a piece was, this is the first time that we've had a small series of refrigerant numbers, R numbers, that apply to such a wide variety of applications. 454A, 454B, 454C, making up roughly 90% of applications, right? Of the work that you see out there. Up until now, it's been wildly different, right? 22 and 404A and 513, right? All these different refrigerant numbers, but this is the first time it's all really very tight. If your contractor comes in and says, give me a jug of a 454, right? You kind of need to be up to speed on which one's made for which, and you need to be able to ask them, what you doing, boss? And dial him in on the right one, so you know a little bit more about it than he does. It's not such a simple question anymore. You know what I mean? 454 can apply to a lot of different jobs. So it's going to be good for you guys to know what that is. Also, when it comes to we haven't officially launched those products. Going into this year, we were expecting the EPA to rubber stamp it and be good to go back in the early part of the year, January-ish, right? It still hasn't happened. So what we thought was going to be happening has now turned into that lovely yellow flag that's out on the NASCAR on the track, right? We're all kind of in a holding position, waiting for this EPA SNAP Rule 26 to come through. Once that does click, then you're gonna hear from us, right? There's gonna be much more noise. It'd be an official launch, a lot more information about it. But until then, we are waiting for that EPA document to get stamped and final approval on it. Let's see. Thank you, Mike. Mike, I appreciate it. Mike just asked another question. Will there be a sub in the field for 410A, 466, 470? Not an option. Oh, so is there a substitute for 410A? Is there like a MO99 for 410A? Anything like that?
And that's where reclaim is going to be so important, because the simple answer is no. If we could have done an A1 refrigerant, that would have been 410A like, the industry would have done it. But to get a low GWP refrigerant and still stay A1, it's just not doable. So I will say that there are some states like California is quickly considering that service gas would have to be a reclaimed or recycled refrigerant. And so that's where I showed that thing, as we approach 2029, the next transition down, it's critical that 410A or 404A gets recycled or reclaimed, because to your point, there is no option right now for 410A for, the existing equipment. We will manufacture it. It's a phase down, but you can imagine without reclaim or recycled refrigerant, 410A will be more than likely be severely impacted on price as it gets later into its life. So right now, yeah, reclaim and recycle is a very big piece of that puzzle to make the service gas and stuff available for 410A.
Yeah, and great information, Jeff. That's the reason I threw out there, would folks like to see it quarterly, because we, as everyone on the call knows, we edited a lot of good information out of this. We had an hour to box in, or 45 minutes, and we're still taking questions an hour and a half into it almost. So there's a lot of good stuff, and Jeff's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole topic on reclaimed refrigerant, really, and what that looks like for the future, right, guys?
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And another thing I'd like to just toss on there as well, part of that conversation is that phase down. I do get a lot of questions, and Jeff, you did address it earlier, but that phase down, that step down chart that we see, the stairs, a lot of contractors and distribution guys think that that's a phase down for 410A. They think it's, refrigerant specific. We're going to stop making the stuff. And so there's that concern, that kind of thing. But that's not the case. It's a CO2 equivalent step down. So it makes folks like us who make the refrigerant, it makes us make business decisions on what refrigerants are we going to make, right? And 410A is one of those that we're going to have to make, right? And so that we're not seeing a reduction of 410A availability. We see a reduction in use, right? There's going to be a lot less new equipment, right? The new equipment's going to use something else. So 6 pounds that goes into every unit that's sold after January 1st is going to be 454B. So any service 410A that you're going to need is going to be there, right? You're going to be able to purchase it and buy it. And 454A component, 410A components, 410A refrigerant, all of that stuff is going to be available for the natural life of the air conditioning unit, right? So 15 years after this year, you're still going to be able to buy compressors, coils, refrigerant. That's the EPA's goal, right? That's part of the design. So that's why there's not really, another reason that there's not really a replacement for 410A.
Yeah, but then, like I say, like the state of California has considered, making it that service gas. Now, how would they identify that? But service gas would be a reclaimed or recovered type of refrigerant.
Yeah.
Could the EPA's RPM, or that refrigerant management program that's still, out there, could they go that far and say that, by a certain amount of time, 2030, that, all our 410A service gas would have to be a reclaim? So it's, like I say, the industry's got to get smarter in doing recovery and reclaim. It's been out there for a long time under EPA 608, but it's 410A is going to be worth money, and 404 is going to be worth money very, very quickly if it isn't already.
Thank you very, very much. Let's see, we've got 3 minutes left. And I see something on here from a good friend, Tim. Tim would like to know what's going to happen with 449A. And that might be a Jeff question.
Yeah, I mean, that could be much like 410A, right? 449 is an HFO blend. So, that's where, if you're installed today, a brand new walk-in cooler of 449, you'll be able to get 449 through the end of that piece of equipment, right? That actually 449's got a GWP of under 1400. So, we actually tried to push on some cases that you could use 449 for new installations for a lot longer. But, right now it's the choice for like walk-in coolers. You don't want to put in 404 into a walk-in cooler. You'd use 449. And if you install a 449A system today, you're going to have access to 449, through the life, because it's a phase down that we're talking about, not a phase out like R22 or R12. So good question.
Awesome. Thank you very much, you guys. We are down to the bottom of the hour. And we have a third of the attendees who started with us are still on. Thank you very much for hanging on with us. Don, Jeff, thank you very much for joining me. This has been an awesome time and really a lot of information. Please look for the follow-up email, everybody in the audience, with the link to the recording. And you know, in the recording, you're going to see these QR codes again. So if you want to, you know, snap a QR code next week, please do. Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. We appreciate y'all.
Yep. Thanks
Bye,
for your
everyone.
time. Take care.
Thank you.